Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I thought I was going to get an equal warm reception as you gave Google. Okay, let me try again. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'm a last born at home, so I've got last born tendencies. So I like when I get home, I get a round of applause that the little one is here, finally. Thank you very much, Gugu, for a beautiful introduction. As she has said, I am Sipho Nxasane. I work at the City of Tshwane, the most beautiful city in the country. If you drive there, all the trees are very purple. So yeah, we enjoy. I'd like to appreciate the opportunity. Sorry, Tandek. Yes, most beautiful, eh? They've got the jacaranda trees.
Jacaranda trees.
Everything is still nice. Thank you very much. So without wasting time, colleagues, I'm gonna introduce the panel that we have today, starting with Mr. Jan Hattingh. Mr. Jan Hattingh has worked in the public sector for 32 years, of which in the past 18 years, he has been a chief director in the intergovernmental relations in the National Treasury. He contributed to the design and development and implementation of the intergovernmental fiscal system in South Africa and is currently the only treasurer official that has worked extensively on budget systems and processes for all three spheres of government in South Africa. Let us give Jan a round of applause. Okay, followed by Ms. Khomotso Letsatsi. She is the Chief Officer for Municipal Finance, Fiscal Policy, and Local Economic Development at the South African Local Government Association. This role involves positively influencing fiscal policy to ensure financial resilience and sustainability of municipal institutions and providing advisory and support solutions to strengthen regional and local development. Khomotso has served in the public sector for 20 years in numerous organizations, including National Treasury, the Public Investment Corporation. She has worked in the city of Joburg for 10 years and has held several positions as group treasurer. Let us also welcome Khomotso Letsatsi. Then she is followed by Mr. Mbulelo Sigaba. He is the chief director responsible for financial services at the Department of Cooperative Governance. He has traversed as the full spectrum and value chain of financial management in the public sector. He worked as a senior manager in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer in the Department of Public Works as a Chief Director and Deputy Chief Director General for Finance, Supply Chain Management in the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. He was also a project manager for operational cleaning audit responsible for Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. Let us give him a round of applause. Lastly, we have Ntate Ben. It says Ben Head. Okay. Transacting municipalities and water boards at the Development Bank of South Africa. In his role, he leads a team executing municipal transactions, including metropolitan cities in South Africa. He has extensive experience in infrastructure, finance, particularly origination, in structuring and financing of infrastructure projects. Prior to joining DBSA, he has worked for the National Treasury, where he was responsible for the governance and financial oversight of the activities of development finance institutions to ensure that they achieve government policy objectives in the financially sustainable manner. Thank you. Let us applaud Ntate Ben. Before we start with our program, there is a video that has been prepared that will give and set the tone for today's engagement. Over to you, technical team.
Cities do not operate in a vacuum. This is why the 2022 State of City Finances report takes a longer view than previous reports by analyzing two local government administrative terms between 2011 and 2021. Key trends and events that have affected city finances over the past 10 years are stagnant national economic growth, COVID-19, emergence of climate impacts, the continuing energy crisis, and the rise of coalition governments. A look at city revenue and expenditure shows an improvement in city financial performance over the 2011 to 2016 local government term, despite increasingly difficult circumstances, followed by a decline from 2016 to 2021 due to revenues coming under pressure and employee-related costs continuing to grow rapidly. Debt impairment ballooned due to the impact of COVID-19 on the ability of businesses and residents to pay their water, electricity, and sanitation bills. COVID-19 dealt a hit to a system already in decline. Capital expenditure as a share of total spending has been declining since 2016. Cities are not investing enough in infrastructure to provide a platform for future growth. Cities' core business is to run the infrastructure they use to provide services to citizens and businesses. We make 4 recommendations to unblock city finances in the report. 1. Reignite the national economy. The national government controls the macroeconomy, but cities have a part to play in creating an enabling environment for local economic development by providing services, regulating land use, and collaborating with the private sector. 2. Stabilize politics and sanitize the political administrative interface. Political instability and interference negatively affect city administration and erode the legitimacy of the system to levy rates and taxes. 3. Strong leadership and organizational culture change. Strong, stable leadership is vital for success. City leadership should restore a culture of good governance and public service, eliminate corruption, and improve relationships with businesses and communities through meaningful engagement. 4. Improve agility and create space for innovation. Capable, high-performing cities should be sites for innovation, testing, and experimentation. The need is urgent. Our cities are the core of our economy and home to most people in South Africa. They are in financial decline and we cannot allow them to fail. These 4 recommendations are complex and challenging and require action from politicians and officials across all spheres of government. But if we make them, it's possible for our cities to succeed.
Thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. Maybe starting with you, Jan. Today we'll be just doing a biopsy of our economic status as financial status as the cities. Maybe looking at the topic of the day, Jan, we look at the state of our finances as cities. The picture that was painted yesterday by the minister was very clear on the economic status as a country. But you being from Treasury, perhaps you can give us a better insight on what is a true reflection of the situation that we are facing as the cities. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks, Sipho. Good morning, everybody. Certainly, as a start, I can associate it or associate myself with a report. The findings is, in my opinion, spot on. Secondly, I think the timing of the report is absolutely brilliant, given that we've now started a new term for after the elections. So this information could be a valuable input into our cities to consider going forward. The fact that they've done the analysis over the 2 terms, you'll see the first term, there was elements of progress. The second term, unfortunate, things start to work or move a little bit the other direction. Now, as a Treasury, we are on record that our cities is actually the engines of growth of this economy. If you look at the contributions our cities make, on fact, on average, they're higher than the national average. Therefore, it's fundamental that we get our cities to work, to be productive, and to be sustainable. And one of those things the cities can do to facilitate and fast track that is to crowd in private sector investment in their decision-making processes. So I can carry on, but I think at the heart of dealing with this economic growth challenge, as indicated by the Minister, but I'm sure the colleagues is also familiar with the Mbulelo project that the Treasury is initially initiated, and we're working now closely with the Presidency. But it's about moving the constraints in the environment in order to facilitate growth. And the energy sector is one example, water is another example, the rail systems, the telecommunication systems. All of those are binding constraints that we're trying to find a solution to remove in order to create the enabling environment for the metros to really then assist us to change that position. So maybe I should stop there.
Thank you, Anne. Maybe, Mbulelo, just to put you on the spot, coming from CoGTA, reflecting on what Jan has presented right now, where are we not getting it right as cities? Why is it that our, if the message in the video was saying we are at the core of the economy, we are the drivers of the economy, what is it that the cities are not doing it right at this point in time for them to get their financial status or position to be in a better position? A reflection coming from CoGTA in this regard.
Thank you for the opportunity. Well, one of the challenges that I think maybe I should just start with the figures that, metros, on the average, they account for about 40% of South Africa's population. And secondly, combined, they generate almost 50% of South Africa's GDP. So these are some of the sort of important points that focusing on metros, it's very important for the economy. And when we look at the rate of unemployment that we have at the present moment, it has got an effect on the revenue base now of metros, because most of the households are actually out of work, and that has an effect now on the revenues of metros. But in trying maybe to sort of sustain some of the revenues that they have, we also need to look at the availability of land. Metros, they want to sort of develop, and so that they can create employment. But you find that some of the land that is available is under claims, and as such, metros cannot sort of develop. Hence, I think if I can be controversial, I think we need to this expropriation without compensation. If it's the right thing to do, I think it's necessary because it does delay the development in terms of having new infrastructure. At the same time, we find that there's a reluctance, from not only just metros, to maintain the infrastructure that we have. You find that maintenance budget is always the sort of easy to be used for other operational costs rather than maintenance. So that affects the growth of the economy, because if you have a dilapidated infrastructure, then your services to the communities cannot be sustained.
Okay. Maybe coming to you, Ms. Letsatsi. From the policy perspective, are our policies enabling us to be able to deal with the ever-changing environment? We know the impact that COVID has dealt to the economy at large. A lot of people have lost income. Would you say at this point in time that the policy framework, it is enabling us as cities to be able to look for new opportunities or improve, the KT that we have. What is it that you think is a stumbling block at this point in time that is not enabling us as cities to move ahead with the times and, be as agile as possible and, enable us to better improve our financial position?
Okay. No, thank you very much. Maybe my point of departure is that if you look at South Africa as a whole, we are actually an envy of many countries in the world in terms of our institutional arrangements and policies. From a macroeconomic policy point of view, that's actually very much market-friendly, but just reflecting as a country where we've come from since the democratic election in 1994, is that majority of our people in communities have actually not experienced how other countries basically see us, especially investors, because the inequalities that are still being experienced, the Gini coefficient, we're amongst the highest in the world at 0.63, and that just tells you how far we still have to go as a country. So the issue around inclusive economic growth is equally as important as issues around inflation targeting, issues around actually just pursuing economic growth, which has basically been a huge challenge for the country, given our level of unemployment. Okay. And if you look at the KT generally, in terms of just the fiscals as a whole, we're not necessarily a country that's short of resources. So the issue becomes how we utilize those resources such that we are able to achieve our developmental agenda as government as a whole. And let's bring it back home to cities. So if you look at the overall budget of local government as a whole, it's about just around 500 billion, give or take. Cities are actually responsible for over 50% of that, and they are therefore significantly important because their performance is positively correlated to the performance of the overall country. So we cannot afford for cities to basically fail. And then let's come and look at what the legislation basically provides for, or the assumptions in the white paper of local government of 1998. So there were in the main 3 sources of revenue that were identified, the category. So the Constitution actually provides local government the power to levy property rates and taxes. And you don't find much of that even in African countries. Pretty much the fiscus is centralized. So South Africa it's in a better kind of state, I guess, compared to most cities, and especially in Africa. And then there's an issue around equitable allocation in terms of nationally raised revenue. So that was another assumption. And then the other assumption, I think, what the Constitution provides for is the ability to basically raise financing for capital program in debt capital markets. And what has basically transpired is that you found that cities were able to adopt very ambitious capital programs because they're able to basically tap on all of those 3 sources of revenue, which is your internally generated funds, which is your conditional grants, which is basically your borrowing. So I think cities have actually done well in that particular regard compared to other spheres or other categories in terms of districts and locals. But where we are in terms of the planning over time, and I think the video basically touched on it, is the issue around the management of the expenditure and stretching and how far a rent can basically be stretched, and basically just the effectiveness of our overall expenditure. So there's certainly a room for improvement in that particular regard in terms of investing in economic infrastructure to ensure the sustainability of cities over time. But what we've seen, because of what the policy basically provides for, that in local government, despite the fact that we are service-facing sphere of government, there's a condition in the MFMA that local government can only raise financing, basically long-term financing for capital expenditure purposes, well and fine, but also is limited to the overall budget. So you cannot run deficit. You see, unlike at a national level, the ALM team can basically go and raise financing to basically cover both OPEX, salaries in the main, and basically capital. So then the question then that we have to put on the table. So if local government is limited to, if your projections around your revenue is rent, everything else, both your operational budget and your capital budget must come within that rent. So what we've seen over the years in terms of that contributed, in terms of the infrastructure backlog, and given the fixed nature of the operational expenses in local government, is that very limited amount is available to basically allocate to capital expenditure. So we've seen repairs and maintenance suffer. We've seen deteriorating balance sheet quality that makes it very difficult for cities in the main to actually embark on huge capital programs. We've seen rising municipal debtors book where customers are actually not paying for the services that they consume, because generally local government works on a post-credit model, as opposed to at the national level, we've got SARS. There's a very efficient model that actually collects taxes in the main from the source. But local government basically delivers the service and relies on the customers to basically be ethical enough to basically pay for the services that they consume. So that undermines the ability to basically protect the revenue so that there's enough to actually put into capital programs, and that's why we see the failing infrastructure as it is. So there's definitely a need, with all the good intentions that came out, to go back and revisit with the 20-year empirical evidence that how best can this sphere of government be supported from a revenue collection point of view. And remember, local government's core mandate is not to be a collecting agent.
Yes.
It's to actually deliver services to people. But if you look at the fact that we are sitting with a municipal debtors book of over 250 billion, it basically changes the energy and the focus, because it becomes a survival issue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to have a follow-up to your statement earlier. You spoke about limitations. Before I come to you, Ben, is there an appetite to be able to address some of the limitations within the policy framework in order to try and close the gap, or at least correct the wrongs that are there? Is there an appetite at this point in time?
Politically, I would say there's definitely an appetite to do that, because at the end of it all, it's what ordinary people have basically been promised in the Constitution.
Okay.
At the end of it all. So we can always argue that there's 1 rand in the kitty, there's 2 rand in the,
Yes.
in the kitty. There'll always be limited resources against the challenges that we are confronted with as a country. So I guess the discussion then has to change to what will it take with the limitations that we have in the system across all spheres of government to make sure that that developmental agenda is realized.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Ben, from your perspective, coming from the bank, are we as cities making an effort to be able to borrow? Are we borrowing enough for capital projects, or are we borrowing too much and you don't see any results? What is your perspective in this regard, looking at the state of finances at this point in time? Are we doing enough as cities to engage institutions like yourselves to be able to get sufficient resources for us to be able to do all of these capital projects that were being mentioned earlier?
Okay, thank you very much. So, to answer that question, and maybe just following up on what Khomotso was saying. So, the cities have 3 sources of financing, particularly for their capital expenditure, right? So it will be their internal generated funds, which comes from, in the main, the collections, and it will be the grant funding from government, and of course it will be the debt finance that they access either from the debt capital markets or even from the normal loan market. So if in the past, especially for the top 5 metros, they have been very active in the debt capital markets. That will be your City of Johannesburg, City of Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, eThekwini, as well as Ekurhuleni. Did I say Ekurhuleni?
Cape
Cape
Town.
Town.
Cape Town, I'll come to that. But those three metros in Joburg, in Gauteng, as well as eThekwini have been very active. The way they've been financing their capital expenditure has been very balanced. So they have been accessing capital markets to raise borrowings, particularly for the income-generating assets that they want to build. So
Yes.
it will be in the main, in the electricity sector, in the water sector, sanitation. Khomotso will agree with me, when she was still at Joburg, we worked very closely and we supported Joburg with quiet facilities to be able to finance their capital expenditures. What we have seen, the second political term, if I may say, from 2016 to now, you have, especially after COVID-19 pandemic and the hard lockdowns that followed that pandemic, you have seen that the cities have been struggling to access capital markets for debt financing. One, because of everything that everybody has said, the cities, and I picked up this phrase from the documents as I was reading, that what makes the city works is the economy that is underlying that city, right? And it's also the ability of the city to be able to collect adequately and legitimately from that economy. So that economy is households and businesses. So the cities, since the advent of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, have been struggling to collect. So you have seen the cash flows under pressure, the liquidity position becoming weak. That in itself has made it very difficult for the cities to be able to come to the debt market and raise capital, debt finance. In particular, since March 2020, after the hard lockdown, the cities have struggled to access financing from both debt capital market and commercial banks. DBSA has been the only player in that space. So we've been around to support the cities in that space. And it was very, very important for us to be present when everybody else pulled out. And understandably so. I mean, commercial banks are chasing commercial returns. We're a development bank, so we finance mainly for capital expenditure, which in the main are development projects. So we had to stay in the space. But we are also facing our own constraints as a bank. Because we have been present and supporting the cities, we are now reaching our own prudential limits, the obligatory limits, in terms of our exposures. City of Johannesburg, COT, City of Tshwane, your municipality, right? Ekurhuleni, eThekwini, we are slowly reaching our exposure limits. So in that sense, we will also be pulling back. But hopefully, because we have been around, we're going to start seeing commercial banks coming back into the space to help the cities finance their capital expenditure. So simply to answer your question, have the cities been active in accessing funding? Yes, but after the COVID-19, it has been very, very difficult. They have been making efforts, but simply because of the deterioration of the credit quality of the balance sheets, as Khomotso said, it's very difficult for lenders and investors to look at them as attractive destination for investments, except for, of course, DBSA. But we still do our due diligence, and we believe we understand municipalities better than anyone. That's why we are still present in that space.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to take advantage of a word that Khomotso used when she said the mandate of cities is basically not to collect revenue, if I heard you very well.
Collection agency.
Now, as a follow-up, and the question is going to be addressed to you, Ben, and to you, Mbulelo. Are there alternative ways that municipalities could use to still collect revenue without following the conventional, probably an add-on to the current methods of collection? We know now we can only get income from selling electricity, water, levies, etc. Are we at the point now, looking at the state of our country, some people not working, are there innovative ways that we could look into where cities now can, collect revenue so that the kitty is not affected by the state of affairs? The question is addressed to the two of you gentlemen. Are there alternative methods that the cities could look into going into the future? Starting with you, Ben, if you may.
Okay, so as far as I know, and I stand to be corrected, the intergovernmental framework or local government fiscal framework is such that the cities and municipalities as a whole are able to collect as they provide services. They must therefore collect because there's a cost to the services that they provide. So they should be able to collect. So I'll start from there. I'll start from saying there are basics that have to be in place before
Correct.
you can even start being innovative. So firstly, collect what is due to you.
Yes.
And you can only do that if you have your consumer database in order. You know who are your indigents, those who cannot be able to pay for services, and those who will be able to pay for services. We know that the cities relaxed their collection modalities at the advent of COVID-19, simply because households were struggling and business was struggling. But I think we're starting to move away from that, and the cities will need to intensify their collection ability. Secondly, if you look at one of the things that we look at as debt providers is the maintenance of the infrastructure, right? And if you look at the distribution losses because of the lack of maintenance of the physical assets on the ground. So the cities as a whole, you will know that the distribution losses, both for electricity and water, are extremely high. Again, it differs city to city because you do have some cities with low electricity distribution losses, and we have others with very high at around 30%.
Okay.
The water is the same. You can have to have a situation where in one particular city, a big city, you have non-revenue water sitting at 50%. So that is revenue, potential revenue that is sitting there that the cities should be able to collect. So I'll say start with the basics, collect what you can collect, but make sure that also you work on curtailing distribution losses because that's where potential income is going to come from.
Thank you.
So coming to the second issue of being innovative, there are a number of infrastructure delivery models that the cities can perhaps look at. I know at the DBSA we have been looking at some where we are looking at, or the cities can look at the future development in that space. You spoke about the land, where they've identified the land, and there's a potential for property development, and they can be able to mobilize development charges as a form of alternative income stream coming through. The other way is high time that partnerships are mobilized by the cities and those in the sector. You need private sector capital to start flowing to the city. And you do that by making sure that you got the basics right. You make sure that one of the things that Auditor General has highlighted in previous reports is a huge unauthorized and irregular expenditure that the cities have been incurring over the years. So you have to get that governance arrangements in place. You have to make sure that you have a solid interface between political oversight as well as administration. And we have seen, in fact, the cities can even, take lessons to some of the intermediate cities that I can name who have been doing very well in terms of that political and administration interface.
Okay.
And you can see as it goes down how it actually makes the city perform. So, yes, let's do the basics right before we even try to innovate outside what we could possibly do in a
Great
variety
stuff.
of ways. Yeah.
I'm just mindful of time.
Okay.
So let's just take your comment, and then I know that Khomotso also wants to add, because I want to give the audience an opportunity as well to contribute to the conversation in the remaining 5 minutes of our conversation. Just briefly, your add-on to what Ben has contributed.
Thank you. I will brief. I think the first thing is for the municipalities to provide the right service. You can't be expecting consumers to be paying for dilapidated services, in other words, where there's no infrastructure. If you cannot collect your refuse on time because of labor unrest, then people have got to throw their sort of dust, all over the show. So obviously, I think that's the first thing. And then you need, I think we need to digitize now our sort of systems of collection. I think it should be easy for someone to pay even using your phone, for your services. You don't have to go and queue at the counters to pay for your services. So if you can improve on that, on digitization. Also this active citizenry, we need to promote it so that people must understand that when they are paying for the services, the contribution that they make towards the economy, and also recovering what the municipalities have spent. So it's very important, and also I think our tariffs must also be cost reflective.
Yes.
We've been having a lot of increases that are above inflation. Obviously this becomes unaffordable now for the men in the street. I think the last one was to really, we use our credit control policies to the letter.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I could end there. Thank you.
Khomotso?
So thank you very much, moderator. I think the alternative way, so we know currently cities are actually operating on a post-credit model.
Yes.
And which is pretty much a one-size-fits-all model. If you had to go and unpack the customer base general of local government, is actually a mixed bag, which explains why we're sitting at over 250 billion that's basically been owed to local government. So that services consumed. I can hear the issues that have been raised is that someone paid for those services in terms of bulk purchases. And on the other side, someone consumed them and then decided basically not to pay for them. So what it tells us is that the model that has basically been introduced for collection is not working, if you just look at the numbers. So what becomes the alternative? So as SALGA, what we've basically put forward, appreciating and accepting the challenge based on the numbers, is that can we look into systems like SARS, where we know we've got a very effective system, and how we can leverage that pocket of excellence to basically assist local government in addressing this issue around non-payment of services on the one side. And then to what extent we utilize national legislation, like your Tax Act and your licensing legislation, wherein if you have to do any business anywhere in the public sector, you are required to go get a tax clearance certificate from, if you're a business, from SARS. But nobody actually looks into whether you are up to date in terms of your rates and taxes. So that integration of ensuring overall financial sustainability in government then becomes important. If you go and renew your license disc for your car, we should be able to leverage on that particular system to check if your property rates and taxes are basically up to date before that is issued. And we believe that those kind of instruments would actually enhance the ability of local government to basically collect.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe before I take a round of questions, I'm just going to ask Jan one last question. What should be done to improve the financial sustainability of our cities?
Sipho, there's a number of things that we advocate as a Treasury. Firstly, given the scale and the operations of our metros, we are advocating that they need to generate surpluses on the operating side of their budget. That will then enable them to augment their capital budget, because currently infrastructure-led growth is your ability to invest. If you take the capital budgets that the review is showing is moving in the wrong direction, you exclude the capital transfers from the national government in the form of grants, then you see the ability of the cities to make trade-offs. So we are saying, generate the surplus on your operations, augment your capital budget. If you do owe Eskom or water boards, then you can set aside that funding to repay your debt.
Okay.
So that's the one thing that's critical. The second thing is leadership and trade-offs. Unfortunately, we are at the moment struggling with political instability in our cities. The impact on that on the administration is huge. So it's like at the national cabinet level. If your council don't sit religiously, they don't make informed choices, then you can't expect the city and the administration to get on with it.
Okay.
Just to add on perhaps this issue about the collection.
Yes.
In order to explore a new revenue source, you must exactly collect what you can currently collect. Now, the local government system by nature has got extensive tax powers. Unlike provinces, provinces only collect 3% of their revenue. So 97% comes from the national fiscus as a contribution. Local government is supposed to be exactly the opposite. And in the metro space, there's no excuse why the metros can't collect their revenue. Now, one of the unintended consequences of a policy choice by national government, we make a choice that we want to expand services to the poorest of the poor. We make a choice to invest to get rid of backlogs. The unintended consequence of that is we have actually spoiled our metro to sit back and not collecting what legitimately they should collect. So the proposal by SALGA is an innovative way to explore, but that doesn't take away the fact that as a metro you should be self-sustainable. And this is some of the challenges that we are grappling with as a collective. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm only going to take one question from the audience, being mindful of time. And there's a gentleman, I think he has got a burning question. Please be very, very brief, sir. Give us your name, organization that you are from, and who you are addressing the question to.
My name is Michael Sachs. I'm from Wits University, and I'm not addressing the question to anyone in particular.
Okay.
The question is, or the difficulty I have in understanding this debate about municipal finances is that the whole discussion is constructed around an idea of corporate finance. In other words, we are talking about the balance sheet of the whole municipality. But if a municipality is selling electricity, on-selling electricity, why are we not talking about project finance? In other words, the sales of electricity should be enough to finance the construction of electricity infrastructure that is needed on the basis of the collection of those electricity tariffs. And if there's a shortfall in financing the electricity system, it indicates that either the price of electricity is too low or the municipality is not collecting the revenue, and therefore, because, sorry, Chair, just a small thing. For me, the difference between province and provincial government and local government is not necessarily the source of revenue. The source of revenue arises from the fundamental difference in what they do. Provincial government provides services that are free of charge at the point of delivery to the whole population. In other words, healthcare and basic education. Local government is selling something, electricity and water, which is in exchange for a fee. And if it's to become simply a provider that doesn't collect the fees, then in a sense, doesn't that undermine the whole idea of a sphere of government being a separate sphere of government?
Thank you very much, Michael. I think you have just echoed what one of the panelists was saying, that let's do the basics right so that everything else will be fine. So as we draw to our conclusion, I would like to ask maybe the panel members to give their final remarks on the subject, which is the state of finances in South African cities. Starting with you, Jan. Just 2 minutes or 1 minute, in fact, because we are over time now.
Thanks.
Your final remarks.
Sipho, and the professor should actually help us to answer that question because he was the capable person running the budget office in the National Treasury. Leadership, decisive decision making, making the right choices. As a Treasury, we provide advisory services to our municipalities. We've got a structured process where we engage and assess their budgets. The hard reality is sometimes they don't take the advice. They make the mistakes over and over. And I can cite a number of examples where we've gone through the same thing over and over, and you would have assumed people would learn the lessons. For the period ahead with coalition governments, I think we're in for a treat.
Yes.
And I recently joined a study tour to Copenhagen with our political principles, and we need to figure out how we're going to deal with this matter.
Okay.
Good. Thanks.
Yes, that's your final remarks, ma'am.
So for me, really, and having been in local government as well, one thing I got to appreciate is that data is gold. And just having effective and efficient system to be agile. So a lot of processes are actually pretty much still manual in nature, where if I look at where we were in 2010 with the economic meltdown, where cities were usually impacted in terms of their liquidity point of view, decisions, I mean, we are a highly regulated sector, so there are processes outlined in legislation. So decisions have to be made as quick as possible. So there's benefit basically in that particular regard. The issue around looking at the service delivery model becomes very important in terms of making sure that there's basically sustainability in how cities actually deliver on their mandate, but also an appreciation that, you know, the customer profile, it differs from one city to the other, but we tend to have a one-size-fits-all kind of an approach in terms of own processes and systems. I mean, the issue around credit control and being consistent in effecting credit control can never be replaced by any other thing. That talks to the protection of the existing revenue streams while we're basically looking at alternatives. I mean, I would like to have that engagement. I know we don't have time.
With Prof,
With,
yes.
with Prof afterwards, I have my views in terms of that particular regard. But yeah, so the leadership tone also becomes important over and above systems and processes.
Okay, let's take Mr. Mbulelo Sigaba very briefly.
Yes. Metros, you know, have got, they have report to different political principles. You've got various grants, you know, that come through, you know, the municipalities. For instance, let's take Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. They've got the EPWP incentives. They've got Department of Transport. You've got Water and Sanitation. You've got, you've got National Treasury. You've got CoGTA. All these departments, they've got grants that have to be implemented at metro level and also at local level. But the challenge is that sometimes it takes a lot of time to make those decisions in terms of integrating these grants. So hence, I think what is important is that we need to integrate, we need to look at restructuring some of these grants so that they don't really create a lot of administrative burden into the municipalities. Thank you.
Ben?
Thank you very much. So from the lender's perspective, if I were to give you debt financing as a city, I look at your ability to collect. That's it, because that's a source of repayment on the debt facilities that we provide to you. But over and above that, just touching on Prof's comment, what we have started doing as a DBSA as well is to explore different, as I said earlier, different financing and delivery or a model for infrastructure. So project financing is one of them. In fact, we are currently working with a couple of metros and some of the cities around the property development on how we can structure that. And it's a development financing institution. So we come in and we provide some sort of a grade enhancement to allow private sector to then come and provide senior debt.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It is clear, organizing team, that 45 minutes for this kind of conversation is not enough. There is a lot that we still need to unpack and learn. CEO, this is a challenge to you, that next year we have a session before the year ends and engage on this discussion. There are a lot of issues that came up around data. Let us learn the trends. What are the trends? Cities that have done well, what are they doing right? There was an issue about leadership, about decisive choices. We need to have active citizenry. So those are the core elements that would make our city's financial position improve. And I like the fact that we as citizens of South Africa, we must take the responsibility of paying what we consume. And for that, colleagues, thank you very much for your time. Let us give our panel a huge round of applause.
The State of City Finances report examines the finances of Johannesburg, Cape Town, eThekwini, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, Nelson Mandela Bay, Buffalo City, Mangaung, and Msunduzi to determine their general well-being and assess their ability to deliver on developmental mandates. Achieving an effective balance between capital infrastructure investment and efficient operations and management are at the heart of the financial challenges facing cities. In short, cities need resources to become urban spaces that function well. The State of City Finances report is the only publication that analyzes the finances of our cities from this perspective. The report highlights the systemic issues in the fiscal framework that prevent cities from achieving the developmental outcomes envisioned in South Africa's urban policy, the Integrated Urban Development Framework. Since the first State of City Finances report in 2007, there have been reports in 2011, 2013, 2015, 2018, and 2020. The 2011 report outlined the country's local government fiscal framework and situated metros within that framework. The 2013 report established the linkages between the affordability of municipal bills and the ability of cities to raise revenue for infrastructure maintenance. It also considered how to finance the green agenda. This report established a pattern followed in subsequent reports of updating the state of municipal finances and examining the ability of cities to achieve the outcomes of our urban policies. The 2018 report focused on sustainably financing cities through aligning municipal budgets with policy and planning to achieve spatial transformation, increasing own revenue with alternative financing solutions to bridge the capital funding gap, addressing energy diversification, and financing climate change adaptation and resilience. In 2020, the report looked at the local government equitable share, a critical component of the division of revenue and the local government fiscal framework. The report also examined the early impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on city finances.